James Bond, what I think. Hello and welcome to this week's video. The last few weeks I've done a couple of these kind of overall encompassing vids looking at a cultural phenomenon or franchise of some regard and just giving a general overview of what I think of it. I've done the MCU, I've done Star Trek, and this week I thought I'd do James Bond. Now James Bond was, you know, ever present as a kid. It was usually on every Christmas, around Christmas. I, of course, I have many other childhood memories of it, and I have seen every single James Bond movie to date. So even though there's really only one subsection that I would call myself a fan of, but we will go back. This is about the movies, not the books. I've not read any of the books. I'll go back to the very beginning with Doctor No. 1962. Doctor No is okay. It's a reasonable start to this series. I like Sean Connery as an actor. I mean, he's one of my favourite actors, but he's not my favourite Bond, which I know will get me pummeled with Rotten Tomatoes. But he's alright. The next one was From Russia with Love. I can't act with him From Russia with Love. I think it might actually be my favourite Connery. It comes across as a real kind of different sort of. They hadn't gotten into like a formula really. It was more of like a straightforward sort of espionage thriller. I rather like From Russia with Love. The next one is Goldfinger, which is arguably the first kind of James Bond movie that in the James Bond style that we've come to think of as the James Bond style. I don't like it as much as From Russia with Love, but I think it is pretty good. Gert Frobe makes a solid villain. You've got Odd Job as well, the first of the kind of gimmicky henchmen that Austin Powers used to love so much. Yeah, it's pretty decent. The next one is Thunderball. I'm not a fan of this. I've seen it once. I nearly fell asleep. It was incredibly boring. Unfortunately, I also kind of feel the same way about the next one, which is You Only Live Twice, which has an interesting premise, but yeah, it kind of falls off a cliff and just gets rather tedious. Real snore-worthy material. That was it for Sean Connery, or so it seemed. We then had On Her Majesty's Secret Service with the one-shot Bond George Lazenby. I'm kind of conflicted on this. Growing up, it was always kind of very much the oddball, wasn't it? The odd one out, with a Bond that no one really liked very much and a rather strange tone. It's come to be reevaluated since. I saw it again, I don't know, about 10 years ago. Well, about 10 years ago. I actually thought it was quite good. I thought it was pretty decent. I mean, I like Diana Rigg in it. I mean, I love the Avengers, so it's nice to see her in a James Bond movie. It's Telly Savalas, isn't it, as Blofeld in this one? He's pretty good. That being said, I tried to watch it again a few years ago and found it incredibly boring again, so I don't know what to tell you, folks. The next one is Diamonds Are Forever. I don't think I've actually sat through this the whole way through. Sean Connery is back very briefly. I might have to give this one another go. I don't think I was entirely in the right mood for it. And that was it for Connery in the official James Bond movies, at least. And he was replaced with a rather longer lasting Bond than George Lazenby. The incomparable Roger Moore. Yes, I'm sorry, he's my favourite James Bond, and he always will be. And if that makes you butthurt, well, I hear there's a cream for that, so that's all I can suggest. His first one is Live and Let Die, which I love. Coincidentally, it's the first James Bond that I absolutely love. I think Live and Let Die is a great Bond. It's got an interestingly different tone and feel to it, with like the pseudo black magic stuff, which even though it turns out to be a cover for something else, there's still an indication that it might actually be real, which is kind of interesting. And Roger Moore is fantastic from moment one. Effortlessly slips into the role and makes it his own. Sean who? The next one is The Man with the Golden Gun. I like Man with the Golden Gun. I don't love it. It's probably my second weakest Roger Moore. It's still watchable, and it's got some. It's got some appealing things to it, like Christopher Lee as the villain. Nick Nack is another fine comedy henchman. It doesn't entirely work. Roger Moore's Bond also seems to be rather out of character. You know, he's running around slapping women around and all this sort of thing. That's much more in line with the brutish Connery version. It seems wildly out of character for the Roger Moore Bond. I don't think he liked it very much either. So that's a little bit weird, yeah. But I'll watch it again. It's not in any way bad. The next one was The Spy Who Loved Me in 1977. Possibly the greatest Bond movie ever made, with only one other serious contender, in my view. I adore The Spy Who Loved Me. It's James Bond in its purest form. You've got an absolutely iconic henchman villain in Jaws, of course, with Richard Kiel. It's just, and the whole thing also feels a lot bigger budget than, well, probably any Bond movie to this point, actually, with maybe the exception of You Only Live Twice. It's very much bigger scale than the previous few. I love The Spy Who Loved Me. It's one of my all-time favourite movies. In fact, the only one that matches it is the one that follows next, and that's 1979's Moonraker. I absolutely fucking adore Moonraker. Now, again, I'm sorry if you don't like Moonraker, if it makes your butch clench because it's not all serious and grim and gritty, I think you're watching the wrong channel. I'm sorry to break it to you. This is not the video for you. I fucking love Moonraker. It's a wonderful follow-up to The Spy Who Loved Me, with a kind of with an almost identical plot, albeit in space rather than in the sea, and we've even got Jaws back. I saw Moonraker for the first time actually in junior school. It was like a Christmas treat. I've told this story again, but I don't care. I love it. I've told this story before. I don't care. I love it, so I'm telling it again. I can't remember the exact year. I'm thinking it was probably, I think I was probably about 9 years old, and they trooped us all into the assembly hall to watch something, and we had no idea what it was. We were expecting some kind of, Disney crap or something like that. And we got freaking Moonraker, and we absolutely loved it. One of my favourite childhood memories. And then the following year they did it again, and we were expecting another James Bond movie, and we got Laurel and Hardy. It's a wonder there wasn't a fucking riot, I'm telling you. Anyway, I adore Moonraker. It's funny as fuck. I'm sorry. It's one of my favourite movies of all time, and it's tied with The Spy Who Loved Me as my favourite James Bond movie. I'm sorry if you're the kind of person who thinks Casino Royale is the epitome of Bond. Yeah, I don't think we're going to get on. I'm sorry. The next one is 1981's For Your Eyes Only, which just kind of pull back on the camp a little and get a little bit more gritty and serious. I still really like For Your Eyes Only. It's a very solid James Bond movie. Again, Roger Moore's just so effortless and so fantastic, in my opinion. And I adore Carol Bouquet as the Bond girl. She's my favourite Bond girl. She's absolutely gorgeous, and she wields a mean crossbow as well. What more do you want in a woman, really? Come on. Yeah, again, it's not up there with the last two. Still absolutely love it. The next one is Octopussy, which I have to be honest, it's my least favourite Roger Moore James Bond movie. It's very odd because I must have seen all of these as a kid. I saw all the Roger Moores as a kid. It was the one I had no childhood memory of seeing. And I seem to recall that my brother rented it in the mid-90s on Laserdisc, and we didn't like it. We thought it was boring. and it was another 20 years before I kind of picked up the DVD/Blu-ray, whatever it was, and gave it another chance. I still think it's boring. At least for I think it's like 2 hours 20 or something, and the last 50 minutes are kind of okay. The last 50 minutes, things actually happen. But for like the first 90 minutes, all the plot seems to be about is these counterfeit eggs, which is really not very interesting and kind of boring a plot for a James Bond movie. I mean, because eventually we get this whole thing with, there's someone's trying to set off a nuke or something. It's like, okay, that's more like it. We should have had that, the whole movie, not just in the last 50 minutes. I just don't like Octopussy. I'm sorry. And Roger Moore is my favorite James Bond. I love most of his, or at least like them, as with Golden Gun. This one I just find absolutely snooze-worthy. I'm really glad, to be honest, that the plan initially was for this to be Roger Moore's last. I'm actually really, really grateful that it wasn't, and that we got one more. Because the next one, 1985's A View to a Kill, which is his last. I love A View to a Kill. It's probably my favourite after Spy Who Moonraker. I know some people, you hear some whiny little wankers whining on about he's too old for it. Really? He looks younger and fitter than Daniel Craig did from about Skyfall onwards, and yet that fucker was still around for another fucking decade. I think A View to a Kill is just enormous fun. How can anyone not like A View to a Kill? You've got Christopher Walken chewing the fucking scenery as an awesome villain. Grace Jones as an awesome henchwoman. You've got John Bloody Steed himself, Patrick McNee, as a sidekick for Roger Moore. My only complaint is he should have been in it more. I love View to, and you got some fantastic action scenes. I love the climax on the Golden Gate Bridge. I love A View to a Kill. I'm sorry again if that causes butt hurt. There are creams available. I adore A View to a Kill. It's not just my third favourite Moore, it's my third favourite Bond movie after Spy and Moonraker. I'm sorry. Well, like it or lump it. And again, I have to say, I'm really glad Roger went out on this and not the fucking boring Octopussy. That's my opinion. This is the send-off he really fucking deserved. You might think, oh, well, you're not going to like the next one then, given it's a different Bond. I kind of like Timothy Dalton, and he takes over in The Living Daylights. I think it's a shame Dalton didn't do more than 2, to be honest, because I kind of like him. He's my second favourite Bond. Living Daylights is a bit of a weird one. I really like it for the first half. It really engages for the first half. I find that once you move to the Afghanistan stuff, which also looks very politically suspect these days, with the Taliban as the good guys, that hasn't aged well. I just find it gets kind of boring. That whole section just sort of sends me to sleep. I don't know why, it just does. Which is a shame, because like I said, I really like the first half, and I really like Dalton. Okay. The next one, unfortunately Dalton's last, is License to Kill. I really like License to Kill. Definitely my favourite of the 2. It was very controversial at the time because it's bloodier and nastier than a lot of it. And to be fair, it doesn't really feel much like a James Bond movie for the most part. It feels like a blood-soaked 80s revenge thriller. And I have absolutely no problem with that. I really like the tone. I think Darby's a great villain. And I love that Q actually gets more to do here than in almost any other fucking Bond movie. And Desmond Llewellyn is as charming as ever in an extended role. I really like License to Kill. There was a long gap after that, of course, and the Bonds didn't come back until 1995 with GoldenEye. This is where I have to say, I have to be honest, I'm not a James Bond fan as of the franchise. I love Roger Moore's time, and there are a couple of others I like. Generally speaking, I think Bond kind of, much like Doctor Who, was never really the same after 1989. I liked GoldenEye at the time, at the cinema. I really enjoyed it. I don't think it's aged terribly well. And this is the one that everyone says is the best, Brosnan. It doesn't really do that much for me. The next one was Tomorrow Never Dies, which I've seen once. Was very forgettable. Same goes for The World Is Not Enough. And frankly, the same goes for Die Another Day. The Brosnans are just kind of weird. The Brosnans can't quite seem to decide what they want to be. You know, I mean, I think the problem was that you had a lead actor who wanted to be Sean Connery with a production team who wanted him to be Roger Moore, and he wasn't best served in either capacity, I would say. I'm not a fan of the Brosnan's era. Again, I like Brosnan in other stuff. I'm not really a fan of him as Bond. And then there was another mini break, not as long as the previous one, and then we entered the modern era. Oh dear. With Daniel Craig as Jason Bourne. Sorry, James Bond. Yeah, I have to be honest, I'm not a fan of these at all. Casino Royale, I saw at the cinema. I thought it was okay-ish. I tried watching it again on DVD about 8 years later, about 10 years ago or whatever it was. Turned it off. Absolutely boring as fuck. Sorry, it's just not what I want from a James Bond movie. And again, I know that will cause a lot of butt hurt. I know boring is the new black these days, grim and gritty and totally devoid of any kind of joy or fun is what we all should want now. It doesn't do it for me. I'm sorry, it just sends me to sleep. Quantum of Solace, I didn't see it at the time. I saw it later on. I saw it quite a few years. I think I saw it after Skyfall, because I really wasn't impressed with Casino Royale, and I really wasn't impressed with Craig, and I could not be asked to go to the cinema to see it, especially as it got even mediocre reviews even at the time. I saw it on the TV. I thought it was okay. It's not something I'm ever going to watch again or buy a DVD of. I'm sorry. The next one was Skyfall. Well, not again, really, because I really enjoyed this at the cinema. I enjoyed it far more than Casino Royale. It felt a lot more like a James Bond movie, even though Craig's performance still kind of sends me to sleep. I tried watching it again a couple of years later. I was impressed enough to buy the DVD, which is the only time I can say that about anything in the Craig era. And I tried watching it again a couple of years later, and I was bored. Again, it's one of those I think that's okay at the cinema, and you watch it at home, and you're just like. It got to the hour mark, and I was so bored. I started shouting, "Bring back Roger Moore!" at the screen just to amuse myself. The next one was Spectre. I saw it at the cinema. Really crap. Really boring. What? Blofeld is Bond's brother now, or something? Really? That's the best plot you can come up with. Really? Why not make them gay lovers? I know you want to, or something. It's so fucking ridiculous at this point. I've seen it once. I've never seen it again. I very much doubt I ever will. Yeah. And the most recent one, which took a whopping 6 years to do. Yeah, I know you desperately wanted to beat Roger's record, love Vidani, but come on, you only made 5 movies. I'm sorry, Roger Moore is still the longest Bond. Fuck off. No Time to Die. It took me about 2 nights to get through this. I did not see it at the cinema. I mean, for starters, I wasn't going to the cinema anyway because we were still worried about the supposed pandemic. And I had elderly parents, so I was concerned about getting it and passing it on to them. I eventually rented it on YouTube. It took me like 2 nights to get through it. It's so boring to start with. It got a bit better in the second half. Honestly, when did I see this? I think it was only last year. I don't think it was this year. It was last year. I've forgotten absolutely everything about it. Yeah. Oh, he gets blown up at the end, doesn't he? Okay. And of course, the internet was ablaze with they've killed James Bond 50 years, nearly 60 years, and they've killed an iconic male here. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Daniel Craig's Bond had nothing to do with the others anyway. It was explicitly a bloody reboot. I mean, it's hard enough to believe that all the Bonds are the same people anyway. How exactly was Pierce Brosnan still doing what he was doing in 2002 if he was the same guy that Sean Connery was in Doctor No? He'd be like 70 by now. But I mean, the Daniel Craigs are specifically a rebooted subset, and they're going to do it again with whoever they choose next. I talk about clickbaity outrage. I was not impressed. Anyway, that's my overview of the James Bond. I have to be honest, I'm not really very interested in the franchise anymore, where it's going to go forward. I don't really care who they choose, because I suspect it's just going to be more of the same kind of doomy, gloomy misery porn that just doesn't interest me. I'm sorry. I'm old. I grew up when I was a kid. James Bond was actually fun. I'm sorry. It was funny and silly and entertaining, not boring and full of itself. I'm sorry. I know that will piss some people off. I don't really care. Anyway, that's my overview of the Bonds. The Connerys are all right. I love the Roger Moores. That's my James Bond. I don't really need anything else. That being said, I liked Dalton. It's a shame he didn't get more, and I really liked A License to Kill. The Brosnans were just sort of a mush, and the Craigs were just Jason Bourne rip-offs and incredibly boring. And I have very little interest in it going forward, like the majority of IPs in our utterly moribund modern pop culture landscape. Anyway, that's my ranting for this week. I hope you enjoyed me busting a few more sacred cows, and I'll talk to you again next week. Bye for now.